Why what an awakened empath actually becomes. Jung insight. There is a particular kind of conversation that happens with some regularity in therapy offices, and it tends to make therapists pause in a way that textbooks didn't quite prepare them for. A person sits down and begins describing the process of cutting off their family. They lay out the decision calmly, methodically, without the tears that might have once arrived just from watching a stranger cry across a restaurant. And the therapist notices something that doesn't fit the diagnostic framework they spent years building. This person isn't angry. They aren't engaged in the kind of psychological warfare that usually accompanies a rupture this significant. They aren't defensive, or righteously indignant, or performing self-justification. They are, in the plainest possible sense, just clear. When asked how they feel about the decision, they pause genuinely, like someone sitting with a question they have already turned over many times alone. And then they say something that changes the temperature of the room. They say they feel clear, not guilty, not grieving in the way they assumed they would grieve, not torn between loyalty and self-protection, just clear. The therapist writes something in their notes, because this doesn't match the psychological literature. This isn't healing as it's supposed to look. It isn't the messy, turbulent, emotionally visible process of growth that most training describes. It's something else. Something that everyone around this person seems to find quietly unsettling. And yet, for what may be the first time in their life, this person feels genuinely whole. What Jung actually observed. Carl Jung spent decades studying consciousness in transformation, watching people move through their own psychology, integrating what they had split off, emerging as fundamentally different people. His observations disturbed colleagues because what he documented kept contradicting the comfortable story that therapeutic culture had built around human growth. What he found was that genuine transformation is not always beautiful. It often leaves a person looking colder, more contained, harder to access, and yet, paradoxically, more genuinely alive than before. This contradicted the redemption arc that the industry preferred. The idea that with enough self-awareness and emotional work, a person would emerge as a better, warmer, more expansive version of themselves, glowing softly at the edges, easier to love than they were before. Jung's observations suggested something different and considerably less marketable. Sometimes the person who comes through deep psychological work is less available, less accommodating, and less willing to compromise their own integrity for the comfort of others. And this, he believed, was not a sign of damage. It was a sign of actual individuation. The spiritual wellness marketplace has spent considerable energy misrepresenting this process, particularly when it comes to a specific type of psychological transformation that has been thoroughly romanticized and commercially packaged: the awakening of the empath. Not the spiritual version of awakening, which tends to be stripped of its psychological complexity and sold back at a markup, but the actual transformation that occurs when a person with extraordinary sensitivity finally begins to interrogate why they have it and what it has cost them. This transformation looks nothing like what the contemporary wellness industry promises, which is precisely why it matters to describe it honestly. The wound that was called a gift. To understand what an awakened empath becomes, you have to start by understanding what they were before the awakening. Jung did not romanticize this. He looked directly at the unawakened empath without softening what he saw, and what he found was not a gift. It was an adaptation, a survival mechanism forged in difficulty, not bestowed by the universe or earned through spiritual merit. The child who could detect a shift in their parents' mood before a single word was spoken did not develop that sensitivity because they were spiritually advanced or cosmically chosen. They developed it because failing to read that shift had consequences, real, immediate consequences. The household could move from manageable to dangerous in seconds, and the child who could sense the threshold learned to monitor constantly, to adjust, to anticipate what was coming. Jung called this the wounded healer archetype, and he was unsparing in his analysis of how such a person develops. The empath's extraordinary sensitivity was not evidence of spiritual evolution. It was evidence of a childhood in which their own emotional needs were so consistently unmet that they redirected all their perceptual energy outward. They became virtuosos at reading everyone else's interior landscape because no one had ever read theirs. They learned to absorb other people's emotional weight because the alternative was abandonment. They developed an almost uncanny capacity to anticipate what others needed because meeting those needs had become the only reliable currency of their own value, the only predictable path to safety. The spiritual wellness industry tells a very different story. It tells the sensitive person that their sensitivity is a divine gift, that they are old souls or light workers or chosen ones, that their capacity to feel everything places them on a higher rung of consciousness than the people around them who move through life with what looks like protective numbness. This narrative is seductive precisely because it meets a desperate psychological need. For someone who has spent their entire life feeling broken or wrong or too much, here at last is an explanation that transforms shame into distinction. The very quality that made them feel defective is reframed as evidence of spiritual superiority. The pain they've carried for years without understanding finally has meaning. But Jung would tell you quietly and without drama, in the way of someone who has watched this play out many times, that this narrative is among the most dangerous things an awakening empath can believe. Because the narrative of the empath as spiritually evolved prevents the one process that could actually change them. It prevents them from interrogating the wound itself. It keeps them trapped in the unconscious repetition of the original trauma, dressed now in the language of purpose and spiritual gift, but structurally identical to what came before. The unawakened empath who believes themselves to be spiritually advanced is still an unawakened empath. They have simply learned to feel noble about their suffering. The questions that begin everything. Genuine empathic awakening does not begin with the embrace of sensitivity. It begins with something considerably more uncomfortable: questioning. These questions don't come from the spiritual community because they aren't spiritual questions. They are psychological questions. They require looking directly at the mechanics of one's own psychology, without the buffer of a flattering narrative. Why do I feel responsible for other people's emotional states? What happened to me that convinced me my worth was determined by how much of others' pain I could absorb into myself? When did I learn that my own needs were less important than everyone else's comfort? When did I become a person who apologizes for existing? When did I decide that my role in every relationship would be to smooth things over, to forgive everything, to never hold anyone accountable because accountability would feel like a form of cruelty? These questions lead somewhere the spiritualized empath narrative cannot follow. They lead into the actual darkness of one's own psychology. Jung observed that when someone begins asking these questions with genuine honesty, they enter a period of disillusionment, severe enough that it often resembles a depressive episode. The person begins to see their relationships with a clarity that strips away the editing they'd been unconsciously performing for years. And what they see is devastating, not because everyone around them is overtly cruel, but because the relational dynamics they've participated in for years are built on a foundation of such profound self-abandonment that there is almost nothing authentic left in the structure. They begin to understand that they have been performing a role, the reliable one, the understanding one, the one who never has needs of their own, the one who forgives everything and finds compassionate explanations for cruelty, the one who is always available, never gets angry, sacrifices without apparent resentment. And they begin to realize that this performance was never love. It was not compassion. It was not spiritual maturity. It was a trauma response so deeply embedded in their nervous system that they had, over years and decades, mistaken it for their personality. This recognition creates a crisis, because the performance has become the only identity they know. The role has become the self, and to question the role is to question everything they understood themselves to be. This is where most people stop, because what comes next is genuinely unbearable. What comes next is what Jung documented with the unflinching precision of someone who understood that real transformation always requires something to die first. The death of the helper. The death of the helper. The helper dies when the empath finally accepts a truth they have been running from for most of their life. They cannot heal anyone, not through their extraordinary sensitivity, not through their capacity for understanding, not through their willingness to absorb other people's darkness and carry it somewhere else. All those years of emotional absorption did not transform the pain they carried. It relocated it. It moved from the other person's nervous system into the empath's nervous system, where it settled in and took up residence as though it belonged there. It became chronic fatigue, the kind that rest doesn't touch. It became mysterious physical symptoms that no test could adequately explain. It became a depression that made no logical sense because the life looked functional and even good from the outside. It became the low-level constant hum of anxiety that the empath had come to think of simply as the baseline of how existence feels, not a symptom of anything, not something to address, just the ordinary texture of being alive. Jung called the process of confronting this the integration of the shadow. For the empath specifically, this means integrating the shadow side of compassion itself. The shadow of the helper is the need to be needed. The shadow of constant forgiveness is the inability to hold anyone accountable. The shadow of absorbing everyone else's pain is the lifelong avoidance of your own. Until the empath looks directly at these shadows, their sensitivity remains a cage. And the gift narrative keeps the cell door locked, because if sensitivity is a spiritual endowment, then the suffering that comes with it must have meaning. And if it has meaning, it doesn't need to change. What happens when the helper dies is where Jung's observations become genuinely unsettling to anyone who has built a comfortable image of what healing is supposed to look like. The person who emerges does not become a more evolved version of the old empath. They do not become more radiant, more spiritually open, more warmly accessible. They become something the old empath would have been genuinely frightened of. They become someone their family members don't recognize. They become someone their longtime friends struggle to understand. They become, in a word, difficult. They become boundaried in ways that feel cold to anyone who had grown accustomed to the old availability. They become selective in a way that looks, from the outside, suspiciously like withdrawal. What the awakened empath actually looks like. The first transformation is a shift toward what might be called psychological sovereignty. The awakened empath becomes ruthlessly selective about who receives their energy and time. Where the old empath was available to almost everyone, almost always, the awakened empath is available to very few people. This is not bitterness, and it isn't walls in the colloquial sense. It is someone who has finally understood what their energy is worth, in the specific way that only comes from having watched where they spent it for years. What was created with it, how those people treated the gift, what remained at the end. They have looked at the accounts and found them depleted in one direction only. They have decided they will no longer spend something finite as though it were infinite, on people who treated it that way. Jung recognized this as psychological health rather than damage. The empath has finally stopped confusing self-sacrifice with love. Real love, the kind that's sustainable and mutual, is recognition between two people who have chosen to show up honestly. That understanding ends a number of relationships, and that is, precisely, the point. The old empath would have agonized over each ending, circling back to repair what should have been allowed to end. The awakened empath lets the door close. The second transformation is equally difficult to watch from the outside. The awakened empath develops the capacity to say uncomfortable things, to hold people accountable without softening the truth past recognition, to sit in someone's displeasure without immediately moving to resolve it. The old empath would have absorbed the tension before it fully formed, apologized, repositioned themselves to restore the other person's comfort. The awakened empath lets the tension exist. They have learned that premature resolution is simply another way of prioritizing someone else's comfort over their own integrity, which is, at its core, the same pattern that created the wound in the first place. Jung found this particular development fascinating because it required the integration of what he called the aggressive shadow. Empaths typically suppress all aggression, all fierceness, all capacity for confrontation. But a person who cannot access their own aggression at all is not peaceful. They are domesticated. The awakened empath can be gentle. They can also be fierce. And crucially, they make these choices deliberately, based on what a situation actually requires, not based on which response will keep everyone comfortable. The third transformation is perhaps the most counterintuitive, the development of detached perception. The awakened empath can perceive another person's pain with clarity and choose not to absorb it, not to rescue, not to intervene. This is possible because they have learned the difference viscerally, in the nervous system, not just intellectually, between perceiving suffering and being responsible for it. They recognize pain as belonging to the person who is experiencing it. They hold compassion without allowing it to function as a compulsion. Jung described this as empathy matured beyond codependence. The feeling still exists and is still fully real, but it no longer hijacks behavior. The fourth transformation involves something the old empath would have found intolerable: being misunderstood and tolerating it. The old empath explained themselves endlessly, monitored constantly for signs of misinterpretation, adjusted their communication in real time to prevent anyone from drawing the wrong conclusion. The awakened empath stops. They state what is true for them once, and they do not chase understanding after that. If someone interprets their boundaries as cruelty, they can hold that without crumbling under it. This requires accepting something the empath's psychology was built specifically to avoid. You cannot control how you are perceived. The awakened empath craves authentic connection more deeply than before, but has learned that authentic connection only happens with people who can see them clearly, without management, without careful presentation, without the performance. Finding those people requires allowing everyone else to misunderstand them without spending energy trying to correct it. The fifth transformation is the one that makes the awakened empath genuinely dangerous. Not violent, not cruel, but dangerous in the specific sense that clarity is dangerous to systems that depend on no one looking too closely. They perceive manipulation the moment it surfaces. They identify patterns of narcissistic behavior early. They feel when words and energy are pointing in different directions. This kind of perceptual accuracy, combined with their willingness to act on what they see, makes them threatening to unhealthy systems. Families organized around unspoken rules, organizations built on dysfunction, social circles that operate on the collective agreement not to name what everyone can feel. The old empath was the ideal participant in these systems. They absorbed toxicity without comment, smoothed over the evidence, kept the peace. The awakened empath sees the toxicity clearly and either names it directly or removes themselves entirely. They become someone the dysfunctional system cannot afford to have in the room, because their presence exposes what everyone else has agreed not to see. The cost Jung documented. Here is the cost that Jung documented honestly. The part the spiritual marketplace does not include in its version of this story. The awakened empath is lonely in ways the old empath never was. The old empath was surrounded by people, always. They had a role, and the role gave them function, and function felt like belonging. The awakened empath has shed that role and with it most of those connections. The remaining relationships are far fewer and far more genuine, but the quantity has dropped sharply. There are Saturday evenings when you sit with the recognition that relationships you invested decades in are no longer part of your life, and this does not feel like liberation. It feels like exile. Jung did not pretend otherwise. The transition between the death of the old identity and the stabilization of the new one is among the most painful psychological experiences available to a human being. You have released everything familiar. Nothing has yet taken its place. You stand, as Jung put it, in an open field with nothing surrounding you. The spiritual marketplace sells this transformation as a butterfly emergence, beautiful, visible, inspiring. What Jung saw was raw. He saw people grieving the loss of their own identity. He saw people slowly recognizing that much of what they had called love for decades was actually their trauma response wearing love's vocabulary. There is no aesthetic beauty in this, if you are being honest. There is only the stark reality of transformation. The old self must die. The old relationships must end. The old narrative about who you are and why you exist must be abandoned. And you must find a way to survive the period in which everything familiar has fallen away and nothing new has yet taken its shape. You must learn to inhabit solitude not as a break from everything else, but as the primary condition. You must learn to exist without the ambient validation that came from being needed. You must learn to be with yourself without filling the space with other people's crises. And yet Jung found that the people who survived this transition emerged with a quality that he described with specific precision. Not dramatic power, not visible authority or charisma, but something quieter and far more resilient. Something that cannot be taken away because it does not depend on how anyone else perceives you. The particular quality of someone who knows exactly who they are, someone who understands what they will accept and what they will not, without having to deliberate. Someone who has stopped negotiating with their own limits, stopped apologizing for their own existence, stopped contorting themselves into whatever shape would make the room comfortable. Someone who can sit in their own solitude without needing to fill it with the problems of others. Someone who can feel without being destroyed by the feeling. Someone who can perceive without being obligated by the perception. Jung called this the individuated empath, someone who had moved from unconscious sensitivity to conscious perception, from compulsive absorption to deliberate choice, from performing empathy as a survival strategy to embodying it as something genuinely chosen. They feel everything. They perceive what others miss. But it serves them now instead of consuming them. It informs their decisions instead of dictating their behavior. The individuated empath is not more spiritually advanced than they were before. They are more conscious, more honest, less willing to compromise themselves for the emotional convenience of others, more willing to face the actual reality of their own psychology without seeking refuge in flattering narratives about why they suffer. They understand, finally, that they cannot heal anyone because they now understand themselves well enough to recognize the futility of that goal. They understand that their sensitivity is not a gift that obligates them to serve. It is a capacity they can use or not use according to their own judgment, in situations they actually choose to enter. Most people, it turns out, preferred the old empath, the endlessly available one, the one who would sit with your pain without complaint, forgive anything, sacrifice their own well-being to maintain yours. That empath was convenient, easy to be around. The awakened empath requires reciprocity, insists on honesty, will not simply absorb without question. These requirements feel like betrayal to people who had grown used to the old dynamic. They say the empath has changed, has become selfish, has lost their compassion. Jung recognized these accusations clearly not as descriptions of the empath's decline, but as descriptions of other people's loss of access to a resource they had been drawing on without accounting for it. If you are somewhere in this transformation right now, in the terrifying space between who you were and who you are still becoming, there is one thing worth knowing, that the version of this story sold by the wellness industry will never tell you. The discomfort you feel is not a sign that you are doing it wrong. It is a sign that you are doing it at all. The loneliness is not evidence of failure. It is the natural consequence of outgrowing a life that was built specifically to contain someone who no longer exists. The grief is real and it is appropriate because you are losing something genuine, the person everyone was comfortable with, the role that gave you an identity everyone could recognize. The relationships that were built on your willingness to disappear into other people's needs. That loss is real, and it creates space not immediately, not comfortably, but eventually for the person who was always underneath the performance. Not the person you were trained to be. Not the person everyone loved because you were useful. Not the person whose value was determined by how much of other people's pain they could carry away. The person who exists underneath all the absorbing, all the rescuing, all the accommodating, all the explaining, all the shrinking. That person always deserved to exist without justification, without earning it, without performing anything for anyone. What the awakened empath becomes is not prettier than who they were before. It is not more spiritual or more evolved in any visible, marketable way. It is simply more real, more honest, more capable of genuine love precisely because that love is no longer a survival strategy. Someone who can feel everything without being destroyed by it, who can perceive without being owned by the perception, who can love deeply without losing themselves entirely in the process. That is not a small thing to become. For a lot of people, it is the first time they have ever actually been themselves. Now, I'd like to share a meaningful story with everyone. Bingham. My 6-year-old brother, Bingham, is out back throwing dad's stuff into the air. There goes a comb, a pair of green underwear, a blue tie, a little tin of Skowal. He looks back at me, standing here at the kitchen window, watching him. I wave and he shakes his head and goes back to the pile under the tall oak. Bingham's cutoffs are dirty, strings hanging down and his white t-shirt is wet from sweat. There goes a record, an ancient penthouse, Dad's old tackle box. The phone rings and I go over and listen to the machine. I'm not supposed to answer the phone and let anyone know she's left us home again, but it doesn't matter because before I can pick up, the line goes dead. He is deep into clothes now, pants and dress shoes, a flannel hunting shirt, one of Dad's old suit jackets. He lifts a horseshoe and tosses it over his shoulder, and I duck because it looks like it might come through the window. But it lands with a thud, somewhere out there, maybe in the azaleas. There's a ketchup bottle, some old photo albums, a basketball, then a baseball. Bingham pauses with the baseball, tries to put it in his front pocket, but it won't fit, so he tosses it over his shoulder. Mom started throwing the stuff outside last night. She didn't even look like herself, really. Looked like a crazy woman, like one of those women you'd see on a TV show. But after throwing what she was going to throw, she walked in here, said she was going to find that good-for-nothing son of a bitch, and that I had better watch after Bingham. Whoosh, there goes a toaster, a coffee pot, one of the nozzles off the kitchen sink. Bingham is laughing like a crazy fool. I'd like to go out and help him, but I got my orders and I want nothing to do with one of her 2-day-gone whippings. You wouldn't either if you'd had him like I had. But Bingham keeps going. Doesn't look like he'll ever tire of this work. I'll let him dig until he can't dig no more, and when the pile is gone, or at least the big pile is a bunch of little piles, and he has still not found what he is looking for, I will sit him down and tell him, this is how we will live now, the two of us, or 3 if she comes back. He'll probably frown or go off into some crying fit, but I'll hold him tight until he stops, like Dad used to do to Mom, back then, before he left. Dear viewers, that was our channel's discussion on the topic. Why, what an awakened empath actually becomes, Jung insight. If you found this video helpful or meaningful, please consider subscribing to support the channel. If you'd like me to create more content about emotions, relationships, or other psychological topics, feel free to leave a comment and let me know. I'll do my best to help you understand why you're feeling the way you do and what's really happening beneath the surface. For now, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Thank you.